Hello, welcome everyone. Hi there. Welcome again to the 17th Annual Bosnian-Herzegovinian Film Festival in New York City. This is another one of our series of conversations with the filmmakers participating in this year's festival. My name is Amir Husak, and I'm one of the programmers of this year's festival. Co-presenting with me today is my colleague and co-programmer Diana Jelica.
Hello, everyone, on my behalf as well. And thank you again for supporting this year's virtual film festival. We hope you're doing well and are staying safe wherever you are in the world. It is our absolute pleasure to present tonight's Q&A discussion with regards to the film Sympathy for the Devil, directed by Guillaume de Fontenay. I will quickly introduce him and welcome him before I turn it over to Amir for the first question. We are really looking forward to this conversation. So Guillaume de Fontenay is a Canadian film director and screenwriter from Montreal, Quebec, and Sympathy for the Devil is his feature film debut, which received 3 Canadian Screen Award nominations at the 8th Canadian Screen Awards in 2020. Before becoming a film director, he worked primarily in theater and advertising, and he actually signed on to do this film in the mid-2000s. So this film has been a long time coming, and we want to hear more about that process. The film has won many awards and has played to great critical acclaim in different parts of the world. So we are absolutely thrilled to have Guillaume here. Welcome, Guillaume. You are tuning in from Quebec somewhere, I believe, yes?
Montreal, close to Montreal at the country, yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me to your festival. I'm very pleased and honored to be with you this afternoon.
Pleasure is all ours, and thank you, Guillaume. It is really it is a fantastic film, and we're so happy to have this conversation with you today. I'm going to begin kind of just sort of where Diana already has started by reading your biography, that this film has been long in the making, really going back many years. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you began working on it, and how you became familiar with Paul Marchand's work as well?
Actually, it started in '92 with the siege. I was a young man in Montreal, and I was struck by what was happening, to see a medieval siege at the doorstep of Europe happening. With such an injustice, with innocent people being killed every day. This really touched me and torn my heart apart. So that's my first connection. And then Paul Marchand he was working for French radio and TVs, and one of them was Radio-Canada, which is our Canadian BBC, I would say. So Paul was our voice, and I remember him very clearly because he's the only journalist that I've heard saying, you know, every time he was signing his report, saying, and all this under the impassive gaze of the international community. So he was very affirmative in what was happening in Sarajevo at the time and in Bosnia in general, and actually predict also what was going to happen in Srebrenica, and was furious about it. And then he wrote a book that was published in Quebec first, called Sympathy for the Devil, which is the title of the movie. So I actually read that book in '97. And I was in theater at the time, and I felt I would do I was aiming to do a theater play, having Paul sitting on a chair with just hurt, a used car, smoking car, like, you know, rest of war fields on the stage and just a little chair. And it was still modern at the time, having a monitor of TVs all behind him, a wall of those with the international news going on and on and on Sarajevo and Bosnia and the conflict. And for some reason, I didn't have the guts at the time to meet with Paul. So this only stayed a project. And in 2005, actually in 2004, I started to read the book again, gather all what was happening in Bosnia, because there was a part that was in Lebanon. He did 8 years in Lebanon. And from there, I proposed to my producer kind of a scene-to-scene draft in December 2005, and then we moved on, and I met Paul for the first time in June 2006. We decided to work together, and then from there we wrote the screenplay together with Guillaume Vigneault until March 2009. Paul was very depressed at that time, and went to a psychiatric hospital because he was very, very depressed, was talking a lot about suicide. And then for some reason, he was very smart and got his way out of the hospital. And a week after, a friend of his found him hanging on his doorknob. And he was 1.95 meters, so he really wanted that. So he just slid down on his doorknob and choked himself. And then so that was June 2009. So I met with a lot of journalists that were in Sarajevo at the time, Rémi Ourdan, Patrick Chauvel, Karen Lajon, and then from there, so Jean Hetfeld, Luc Delahaye, Laurent van der Stok, a lot of people. Some were not really willing to talk about it. Others were more open to it. Boba, I was already in connection with Boba Lisbeth, which is in the movie The Love of Paul in Sarajevo. And Paul presented me to Boba, and Boba gave us tremendous help, and we're still in connection today. She's still living in Sarajevo today. And so we moved on after his funeral, and it just was very long to convince the institution to let us have a little bit of money to do this film. It actually took, years to convince them, refusal after refusal after refusal. And to me, Paul asked me to do this film, and it was mandatory to me to fulfill an honor to him, to Sarajevians, to Bosnians that have suffered that siege.
Thank you, Guillaume. It also, just to know that this kind of a film, and I can imagine how hard it is for to find also funding for a story like this, where for a while, and I think when we're talking about specifically about the end of 2000s and the beginning of like 2010 and afterwards, nobody wanted to hear about Bosnia. Bosnia was also the old news in a sense. However, this story resonates so heavily right now. That's what struck me again when watching this film, that at the same time we have Syria happening, and not just Syria, but so many other crises that are just happening at the same time, as you said, quoting Paul Marchand, under this international gaze, and that still things are kind of the same, if not even worse. And I wanted to quickly read something that this was by Jean-Michel Frodon for French Slate, one of his actually praises or critiques of your film. This says that, I'm quoting, "The evocation of journalist Paul Marchand and the way he covered the siege of Sarajevo composes a compelling tale which questions the moral collapse of the end of the 20th century." I'm wondering, as you were shooting this, this was in 2018, if I remember correctly, and you were working primarily with the Bosnian crew and in Sarajevo. Could you tell us a little bit more about production and reflections while shooting on these events and the events of the present as well, I guess?
If I start by the present, because yes, I think it resonates, and I think it's very important to remember. The memory is the key to a better world, and not to do the same mistake once and over and over and over, which is a weird tendency we still keep. And particularly in a time where the president of the United States is talking about, fake news media all the time. How can we accept? How can we hear those voices? How, when governments everywhere in the world, from killing them in their own embassy, from killing them in the streets in other countries, from basically putting them to silence, and what Trump is doing actually right now is giving credit to all those people in those multiple countries where the right to speak, the right to have an information, a decent information. It's never perfect, but a decent information to understand what's happening is in crucial. In crucial time right now. It is very, very. I hope we'll get back onto listening and giving, the voices, listening to those voices, and having the voices of war journalists and journalists around the world to speak up, and so that to me is absolutely echoing our time right now. Talking about Sarajevo now, it was very important for me to shoot in Sarajevo. I've been to Sarajevo for the first time in 2012, where Rémi Ourdan and Patrick Chauvel invited me to join the gathering of the memory in April 2012, so 20 years after the beginning of the siege in Sarajevo. It was all, lots of journalists were there from everywhere around the world. The hotel was filled, and I had the chance to be there to gather information, to kind of try to understand more, because one voice is one thing, but having to cross the many voices, that was important for me to try to be the most accurate possible on the subject. And then it was very important, and I fell in love with Bosnian when I went there in 2012. For some reason, I don't know if it's about Quebec talking about independence also in the 90s. I don't know if it's because we are mixed of culture also in Montreal. Like Sarajevans are really a mix of different cultures. There's something that really talks to me in Bosnia, and it was very important to bring every penny we could to Bosnia and to the film with Bosnians. So 90% of the film crew are from Bosnia, some from Serbia, from Croatia, some from Croatia, but we really gathered a team that was exceptional. And I'd like to underline particularly the work of Sanda Popovac, who did the set design in Sarajevo, who did an amazing job. Sanda Popovac was my angel through all that shoot with Boba Lisdek. They were the two women that really kept me alive there and kept this film alive. Tim Kagrin at the casting did an amazing job. Everyone you see in the film, apart from the French and Belgium actors that we brought to portray the journalist there, everyone was from Sarajevo and from Bosnia. So most of the people you see that are over 30 years old have lived, experienced the siege. Some of our cast crew have lost parents, have lost members of their family, loved one, friends. So I was walking on eggs every day I was there. It was very important for me to be respectful to the energy and the faith this team gave me, and the work that they did. Adis and Emra at Proba in Sarajevo, our production company there, did a tremendous job. Edo and Enzo at the location did extraordinary job there. Sania Jeba at wardrobe, phenomenal job as well. You know, it was very hard because Sarajevo was shot. We shot the film in February, March 2018. So Sarajevo has changed, but we were literally in the Holiday Inn at the TV building, which was EBU at the time. We were a European Broadcasting Union. We were on Sniper Alley, blocked on Sunday morning. You know, it was a very hardcore shoot, and everyone was so helpful, so generous, so professional. We could have never done this elsewhere, and to me, it was extremely important to be there. There was some, you know, I was afraid that sometimes that some lunatic would come and shoot, or some, you know, because it was hard, you know, when we created those war scenes, we had to talk with the population. There's still some people that are, you know, if there's some war journalists that are still PSD, post-traumatized syndrome over these events, we can imagine that the population, some of the people in the population are still also PSD. And so it was, you know, it was something that we cared a lot to make sure that we would do this properly, respectfully, and with Bosnian. So it was a fantastic experience to do it with Bosnians, and I have to underline again and again and again how professional, how good the team was in Sarajevo.
Thank you, Guillaume, for especially for highlighting all of the people who usually are in the rolling credits, but whose names are not that well known, for singling them out. The film's set design and the way that it recreates the atmosphere and the look of Sarajevo under siege is really bone-chilling and visceral in many ways. You mentioned walking on eggshells at different times because there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders as you were making this film. So in a way, you're already telling the story of an outsider, of a Western journalist, from the point of view of Paul. And then there's another layer of an outsider who is you coming in to tell this story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you negotiated that burden of being an outsider telling this story?
It's a tough responsibility. It's a tough responsibility. It was a lot of weight on my shoulder, and this is why it was important for me to gather a team that was Bosnians and that were people that lived that siege, because I am not a war journalist. I am not, I've not lived at siege. I've never lived any war. And only the people, you know, first of all, Paul Marchand kind of wrote that script with us and kind of dictated the script line by line almost, because I don't know how journalists talk to each other. I don't know what type of relation they have, what the jealousy, what's the, what's that guy not doing his job properly, who's that person taking another angle, which is different. And there's many ways of practicing journalism. And Paul has a very peculiar way of practicing journalism. He's clearly not the type that is saying, I'll stay neutral and I'll just give the information as neutral as they can be. Paul was saying that if you are in a war zone, it's because you want it. And if he wanted to be there, it was because he wanted to understand what was happening there. And he was crossing the line every day because he wanted to be first and he could have stayed like others at the holiday and then just write the story that people were telling. He was not that kind. And I didn't want to portray Paul as a hero. Neither I would like to portray myself as someone that is neutral. And, we all have our, we're doing our best. And Paul was a bastard on some level, I think we see it in the beginning of the film. It's kind of even tough to kind of like that guy. And it's only by the end that you understand that this guy, smoking cigar and it's not something that I've invented. He was like this. He was smoking like 200 euros of cigar per day. And he was, sharing the food with the people all the time. And he was going, and I saw a documentary of Paul going to families, to give eggs, to give apples, to give things that were treasure to Bosnians. And he was very generous on that end. And he was, I think if Paul committed suicide in 2009, if people are still asking themselves if he was someone with a heart and a soul, I would say the answer is suicide. He was absolutely discouraged by our world, discouraged by our leader, discouraged by the army of the world, where on every side they were. He was discouraged with the brutality of our different community, and to the injustice that civilians would suffer. And so there's one thing very clear in Sarajevo, and it's something that really was shocking me when I was hearing the news at the time. People were saying, well, we don't know, it's a very complex situation. Well, it is not complex. I mean, of course it's complex, but there's something that is not complex at all, is that there's over 800 Serbian positions around Sarajevo that were firing an average of 330 shells per day, sometime to an extent of 1,000. I think the record was 1,337 or something like this. And these are numbers we have. It's not something that we can elude. It's something, it's things that are very tangible. And there's 12,000 people that were killed, innocent people, civilians, kids, women, older people that were killed and that were put to starve, that were starving in Sarajevo. How could we let this happen? How can we let what's happening in Syria? I think, the problem with the news, the problem with the politicians, the problem with the army, the problem with the UN is that we forget one thing, is whether it's in Syria, in Yemen, everywhere in the world, civilians are the one who get shot, hit, and suffering every day. And this is why that scene with the kid was very important to me. And, it was a very tiny budget, and we had 34 days to shoot all of this. I would have loved to portray more people of Sarajevo, to be a little more in the resilience of Sarajevians into that film, because I think the resilience, yeah, I'm blown away each time I go to Sarajevo and I see, and every day I was working with the team, how resilient, how proud, how honest, how honest also in the way they were looking at that conflict, and how, you know, welcoming they were to Serbia. And it was very important to me to, you know, Boba Lizdek is Serbian, and she was living in Sarajevo, and she, you know, would defend Sarajevo to her life. So it is very important to me as well as not to kind of fire up hatred, but to kind of bring this idea that Sarajevo is a mix of culture. And that's what's interesting about that city. And that's the richness of that city, like New York, is the richness of New York is everyone coming from all over the world being there and sharing something. And to me, Sarajevo is the same. It's a city of smart, cultured people. And it's terrible what's happening, you know, that we let that happen for 4 years, and, you know, it only brought things worse, because there's more, you know, I think it's a very dangerous era we're living into. There's a lot of populism, a lot of nationalism, and not a lot of hatred, a lot of religion, kind of, it's, we have to be careful. And I think it was, and on that side, it was important to me to underline that, you know, this was not a religious war at all. You know, this was a clear injustice of people that wanted not to recognize first the independence of Bosnia, and second, that wanted more territory. And I'm not talking about all Serbians. I'm talking about the nationalist Serbians, you know, that I have, you know, no respect for, because, you know, any nationalism, any, you know, whether they're white supremacists or Muslim terrorists, it's the same shit to me. And we can talk about very clearly and loudly, and I think we should, you know, and Sarajevo was not that at all. Sarajevo was people of culture, people of, you know, the theater were going on, the writer, the Slobodenje, the newspaper of Sarajevo. It's a very moving story.
Guillaume, thank you for saying all of these things. And I think when we say in past tense what Sarajevo was, a lot of us are hoping that it still is and will continue to be, because that resilience and that spirit is there. There's a big question of who gets to tell the stories of those who didn't make it, right? So that is always kind of an ethical question about the trauma that is really unspeakable. And it also at the same time, who gets to tell the stories of the survivors. So just following up a little bit on my previous question as to how much of a burden was it for you? And there's been other non-Bosnian filmmakers or filmmakers not from the region who have made interesting and at times incredible films, sometimes also not great films about the war in Bosnia, problematic films even, and we firmly put your film in the first category of being incredibly insightful. You immersed yourself in the community. Your decision to film your work entirely in Sarajevo, to have the crew be locally immersed and hear the stories, is amazing. But I also wanted to kind of, as a film scholar, for me, it's always interesting. There's been a lot of films made by local filmmakers as well, incredible films about the war in Bosnia, about the breakup of Yugoslavia, and about the siege of Sarajevo. Did you familiarize yourself with any of those films, or did you kind of just want to keep that out so that it wouldn't influence your vision in a way? Could you speak a little more about that?
I've seen probably most of the important films that were made on the subject. I've seen probably most of the important documentaries that were made on the subject. And the siege from Rémi Ourdan and Patrick Chauvel is a very interesting one as well. That I was lucky enough to see as they were shooting in Sarajevo in 2012. I've looked at the pictures of war journalists, photographers, even, you know, the choice of Antoinette Boula was not something like this, because her sister was actually shooting a war journalist. She was a war journalist and she was shooting in Sarajevo. Alexandra Boula was important, and she did a tremendous picture there. I've seen some local documentaries as well, local footage as well, photographer. So I've sucked as much information as I could to be as honest and as close to the reality that I've seen through those documents. And I didn't want to make, you know, like the aesthetic of the film is in that regard. I wanted to keep that format, the 4:3 format, because that format was to me the news format of the time, first of all, and it was also a little more claustrophobic. And there was something I was afraid of, and I had to convince my DP, Pierre Haim, on this, because it would have been easy. Sarajevo is very photogenic. It would have been easy to make beautiful images and to, you know, make it a beautiful, and I didn't want to make war beautiful. I wanted to make it claustrophobic, to feel that we're caught in that tiny screen, and I wanted the camera also to be very nervous, so that we could follow. And so, you know, I kind of try to take out all the champ contre champ, you know, looking this way and looking this other way, the 180 classic that you see in movies. And I would rather go and follow Paul, because these are Aryan string, and then cut from there to there instead of to there, and to make the film a little snappier and more nervous and less cinematographic, if I can say so. I wanted to kind of bring the audience to feel just a little bit of what people were suffering there and what war journalists were doing there. You know, they were risking their life, whoever they were. Some were doing some great work, some very different work than Paul, and still some very incredible work. And, you know, there's, it was very important for me not to take position and to put Paul on a pedestal to say he's, you know, that's war journalism. Not at all. Paul is not an hero. I think, you know, John Burns, there's so many people who did an incredible job. Christian Amanpour, there's so many people who did an incredible, Kurt Schork, who did an amazing job. The BBC, there's so many people who did an amazing job there. So for me, it was very, very important not to put Paul on a pedestal. He's just an Aryan string for me to kind of enter the siege and kind of understand it from his perspective. And
yeah, and you mentioned actually this earlier, and I think that's quite an interesting thing that you also say that, you know, he's not, or he's a complicated hero if he's a hero, or a tragic hero in many ways. And you said that, you know, he was not necessarily liked, and some people considered him a bastard in many ways. And I want to actually ask, and I think it's a good segue to ask you about casting, because Niels Schneider, who plays Paul Marchand, does such a phenomenal job also encapsulating that energy that we see on screen. And he's also a relatively young actor. And later in the film, when we see the actual original documentary footage of Paul Marchand, we were like, oh, there's like a striking resemblance also here. And I think Niels did such a great job. Can you tell us a little bit about casting for this film? Because I imagine it was very difficult because you also knew Paul, and how you met Niels eventually and decided that he would be the right person for this role.
Yes, Neil did an amazing job. I've cast quite a bit of people. There was different time where we were supposed to shoot in 2013, then 2017, then 15, then 17, and then 18. So it took quite a bit. And I met Niels at an audition in July 2017, and it was very clear that Niels lost his brother in a car accident. He was an actor, and he came back from a shoot, and the PA got sleepy and crashed into a car. So a very dramatic ending for his brother, and a terrible loss for his family. So Neil has this thing in him. There's this failure, and to me, that failure Paul had was visible in Niels. And actually, Niels came to Sarajevo earlier, and it took him over a month to leave the jeans of Paul, the cigar, the hat, and he really put himself into a dangerous place playing that role. He really went into there. He was smoking 10 cigars a day, plus the cigarette he was smoking between the takes. He embraced that nervosity. And actually, when we started working on how to play that role, I've asked Neil to make like if he had long arms. And he's not long like Paul is. Paul is 195, something like this. Neil was 182. But he made himself tall. He made himself skinny. He lost, 20 pounds for the role. He made himself into that character, and I was making him listening, which is very dangerous. I was making him listening Paul's voice so that he would find, because if you play the rhythm of someone, you kind of feel the soul of that person. And if you play the gesture of someone, you kind of embrace an energy and something. And we have to understand that everyone in Sarajevo at the time were like animals on a very, very sharp edge of, going, will I be shot? Every time, every moment, you're risking your life. So every time you walk outside, every time you drive outside, every time you do something, you're wondering if you're going to be hit. So it changed the relation of life. And Paul was always saying, I like war because social manners disappear. And it's all about living here and now. And you very shortly know if someone is courageous, or if it's a betrayer, or if he's a coward, or if it's someone of soul and heart. You know people very quickly in a wartime, in a war zone. And so all these things were information that I've played with Niels to make him very alert. And I'd like to emphasize also on because to me, I mean, every actor who played in that film really was extraordinarily generous, and Niels was absolutely extraordinary. We became brothers, and I think, for the rest of our life, there's a brother relationship between us, and particularly with Niels because he's playing Paul, because we've passed every day of the shoot together. Boba, played by Ella Rumpf. She's 22 years old. She was 21 when she got in Sarajevo. She was celebrating her 22nd anniversary when we just started the shoot. She came in Sarajevo in December, just to meet with real Boba Lizdek. She came in Sarajevo just to feel, because, you know, to play, I've obviously tried to find a Bosnian or a Serbian or a Croatian that could play the role, but the role is so much in French as well. I didn't find anyone, but I've cast and I've really looked, and there was some tremendous actors that I've met, but their French was not good enough to support all the French part that Boba had. So I fall back on Ella Rumpf that I've met, and Ella, 21 years old, came in December, met with Boba, met with her teacher, her coach, her Bosnian coach, and she was smart enough to understand that it's not only to say the words, but it's also, and I would think that her attitude says even more. I mean, I'm sure a Bosnian could pick up some little things here and there, but her attitude, like, you know, Japanese, they have a way to talk. The Belgium have another way to talk than the Italian or the Spanish or the Portuguese. And the Bosnian, they have a particular way to talk as well that make them different. And so Ella Rumpf, you know, she met so many people. She picked up the language. She was there to really kind of absorb what was happening. And I think in her pride, in her strength, she really did an amazing job. Vincent Rottier, Harry Volvalter, you know, they all did an amazing job. I think the
such a well-picked
and
cast.
the Bosnian cast.
Mm-hmm.
It's you know, there was something, an energy in that shoot. We were all together, very close. We were like a tight pack, and particularly with the actors and the Bosnian teams, there was something very respectful that happened. And
I'm going to use this maybe opportunity, because I'm seeing there's some comments and questions by the audience. So and here's one from Nisad. This is more of a comment from Nisad from Sarajevo, actually, who's watching right now. This is one of the, I'm quoting now, this is one of the most important movies made about war in Bosnia. Huge respect to Guillaume for keeping the energy to push this through for over more than a decade. May Paul find his peace in a better world than this one is. And I want to read a second one. This is from Tom, and Tom is writing from Boston. This is such a brilliant evocation of the moral complexities of journalistic witness. I would love to screen the film for my students in classes on global ethics and human rights. Is it available for download or for purchase by academic libraries for educational purposes? So I guess it's a more a question about distribution here.
And if I can jump in, sorry, Guillaume, before you answer about the distribution and availability, which is such an important question with respect to its educational purpose for a lot of us. Related to that is the question of journalistic ethics and what Paul, the kind of trajectory he goes through when he realizes at some point that this is not going to make news unless the Western journalists make themselves the news, right? So it is about whose lives matter. And if you put yourself as forward as the story as a Western journalist, that is more likely to make the main breaking news in the Western media sphere than if it's just yet another body count from some Eastern European nation. And we can again relate this to the current wars being led and whose lives matter and whose lives don't matter. So I just wanted to add that in as well.
Absolutely, it's very important to underline it. And thank you very much, Nisa. That really touches me deeply that someone from Sarajevo feel about this movie and that such good comments. It's the most important one for me. To Tom in Boston, yes, you can reach me directly on my Facebook page, Tom, and I will make sure that you can have a link to share. This film is made to share, and I will gladly share it to all your students. And I think there's a very good discussion about ethic, about what journalism, is, and not, Paul was very snob on other type of journalism that was done. I'm not. We actually had some fights between Paul and I under that level because I feel that, some journalists are very neutral. Good, they're doing a work that is important, and we can't afford to have only journalism that is taking position. So I think there's and also there's the star of journalism, the people who only their face bring millions of people in audience, and I think they're making a very important job as well. And if some people like them talked about Sarajevo, it brings more audience. So there's a lot of questions to ask ourselves about journalism in that movie, and I want to portray Paul as the canon of journalism in there. Again, so Tom, with pleasure, please contact me or through the festival or on my Facebook page. I'll be glad to provide the link and make sure that you can share it with your students. It's very, very important for me. If that, it's actually the only reason we're doing film, is to talk to the most people. And thank you for BHFF for having us and showcasing Sympathy for the Devil.
Absolutely. Really a great pleasure to have you, Guillaume. Our time is also running out, I'm seeing now at the moment, but I'll see if another question comes up from the audience, we'll insert it. But I do want to, we like to end with one of these questions that is always kind of looming around when we see someone's work. The automatic question is like, what's next? Are you working on something right now? From the comfort of a Quebecian, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, a countryside, or could you share?
I actually most of the time from Montreal, but I'm not the country right now. But yes, I'm working on 4 scripts right now, 2 for France and 2 for the States, for United States. They are all on injustice. They are all, I don't feel going into comedy. It's not my type, and it's not my interest. I respect the people who do so. I just feel that there's many things I want to talk about, that I want to share, that kind of question my heart and soul, and question my beliefs, and that I want to question myself and question the audience with them as well.
Thank you so much, Guillaume, on my behalf as well. And like I said in the beginning, on behalf of all of us at BHFF, it has been an absolute privilege to showcase your film. Congratulations again. And I do want to quote a line from your film, and this is voiceover right at the end. I assume and believe these are Paul's direct words that resonate with a lot of us who are survivors of the Bosnian War, whether we were in Sarajevo or in other parts of Bosnia. And I quote, "Wars are nothing more than a bit of noise over a lot of silence." This is one of the most profound lines that I have read and heard about the experience that is really difficult to put into words otherwise. So thank you again on all of our behalf.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Guillaume.
I wanted to thank you. You cannot imagine how much it means to me. You are the first festival in United States to showcase the film. It means a lot. It means a lot for me that this film speaks to Bosnians, and with all humility and respect to Bosnian people who had suffered all those years and this injustice, this patent injustice. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. And I'd like to take this moment to thank also the team in Sarajevo. I don't know if some of them are listening now, but thank you very much for the incredible work you do. Sanda, you're a blast. Sanya, Edo, Enzo, Timka, everyone. I really have the greatest lack of words. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Guillaume. And I'm just going to remind our audiences, please vote for these films, and vote also on November 3rd if you have if you can vote. That's very important. This is a historic election. But also vote for these films. All of these films, including Sympathy for the Devil, are eligible for the Audience Award. So once you watch it, or if you haven't watched it, once you watch it, please vote for the films. It's on our system. You'll be presented with a ballot where you can vote. And thank you again all for joining us. We have one more Q&A left, and it's at 6 p.m. for the film The Stitches. I hope some of you will join us for that as well. Thank you again, Guillaume, and thank you again all.
Thank
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Also vote in Bosnian. That's important to mention as well.
Thank you, Diana, for reminding. Yes, November 15th, I think.